Hello, everyone. Today's news centers on an article from the Associated Press entitled Alabama Can Reinforce Ban on Puberty Blockers and Hormones for Transgender Children, Court Says, by Kim Chandler. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals lifted a previous ruling that prevents bans against puberty blockers and hormones for transgender youth. This isn't the first time that we're seeing such bans, much to the chagrin of medical experts who say this treatment is actually beneficial to trans children and not harmful, or so Judge Lyles Burke determined through the state's inability to produce evidence to the contrary when issuing the first ruling that prevented this law's enforcement. Supporters argue it's about protecting children from uncertain or experimental drugs, but critics are calling foul play. Families who relied on these treatments are left hanging, and advocates stress that parents, not the government, should decide what's best for their kids. This decision isn't just about medical care, it's about rights and choices. Stay tuned as this battle between medical science and ideology unfolds. Raphael, take us away with the opening remarks on this segment.
Yeah, it's really disappointing. And again, the party of supposed small government wants to meddle in everyone's lives some more. I guess what I would say is there's a certain type of person who comes to these debates with a conclusion in mind, and they go and search for those one or two studies that agrees with them. So they're cherry picking whatever they're using in these court cases, because they're saying they're not seeing any benefit. When you look at the bulk of this type of research, as well as the testimony of countless trans people, and you see that they are either intentionally not looking at the real evidence, or they haven't talked to a real trans person, or they don't want to do any of those things. They are cherry picking, 3 studies or whatever, when there is a large body of studies that disagrees with those couple studies. And this is how science is done. Is one group publishes one paper, other groups either disagree with it, and as more and more researchers publish papers, you get closer and closer to a good, reasonable answer of what to believe. And they are not doing that in this case, and that is a crime against humanity as far as I'm concerned. We need evidence-based decisions in healthcare, in government, in our personal lives, so it's kind of heartbreaking story. Maybe I'll pass it over to Helen. Maybe she has something more uplifting than I have to say.
Oh. I'm like, I know I keep saying this, but I'm going to say it again. I am getting really sick and tired of religious groups thinking that queer kids are icky, and then they have to come in and say, like, oh, you can't get gender affirming care. And it's very, very frustrating, because this puts not only stress on the kids, it puts it on their families that are supporting them, and they can't make their own decision of, as a family, what is good for their children. And because these groups, they want to sweep in and say, like, oh, you know what, you're not allowed to raise your child the way that you want to raise your child. You don't get to help your kid get the care that they need. We're going to decide that for you. And it gets so disgusting to me, because they're the ones that cry about freedom, cry about privacy. But guess what? You want to tell other people what the fuck to do, and it just gets very, very frustrating to me. I get very angry, and I'm glad there's a lot of families still fighting back against this rhetoric, and I think that's great, because we don't want our kids to suffer. Like, I have a non-binary kid. Luckily, they're adults and they are on hormones and can choose to do that as part of for themselves, which is great. But there are families that, they want their kid is like, I'm kind of don't know, and they want to put them on puberty blockers, which doesn't cause any harm. And they can choose, hey, you know what, I think I am this gender, I want to stay here, or you know what, I'm going to, identify myself with the cisgender and get off the hormone blockers and let puberty happen naturally. These are options people have, but they don't understand the science. And I do have more to say about this. It's some studies that I looked up while doing this article. But before I get to that, I'm going to pass it to Tim over here. He's over here.
Hey, right here. Yeah. Yeah, this story, man. Gosh. So this is proof that a certain political party has no interest in bettering the lives of Americans at all, but instead will fixate on any tiny ideological issue and spend time and money running it into the ground. We're talking about a small percentage of children in America that receive gender-affirming care with the help and guidance of therapists, counselors, doctors at their parents' discretion every year. Yet these people are insistent that this is an enormous issue in which millions of parents are forcing their children for some reason to change gender for no good reason at all. It's absurd. This is the big issue to them. Not the poverty in Alabama, not the lack of good public education. Nothing like that is important enough to focus on. No, we have to make sure that kids who are seeking help can't access it because of our religious and political ideologies. They have to fight this wokeism boogeyman every chance they get and whip their constituents up into a furor over things that affect them in no way at all. And I hate to think of the effect that this is having on the poor trans children of Alabama who read about this and realize they live in a state that actively hates them and who they are. This is who the reigning politicians as Alabama see as their enemy, innocent children seeking help. I just can't express how disgusted and infuriated I am by this. Jimmy?
Yeah, I agree with you. And, this is one of those cases where we can just look at the facts. We don't have to, try and dance around who did what or who said what. It is common understanding that the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is, an overwhelmingly and traditionally conservative viewpoint type of court. But to the surprise for most people, I think, that were following this case, the Trump-appointed judge, Lyles Burke, actually allowed this to go through. And when I say allow, I mean prevented these types of treatments from being banned, which I think is kind of a huge anomaly in cases like this. Now, on the other hand, she didn't allow for transgender surgery to take place on people younger than 19. And that's a different kind of debate that we can have. I think it kind of brings up the question, though, who is in this country allowed to make decisions for themselves? I mean, you can work down to the age of 14 and get taxed, but can't vote. You can get tattoos, you can get piercings, but you can't make decisions about your own surgery. You can give your life for your country, but not buy alcohol. So there is a very fuzzy line on who can do what. And I kind of felt pretty good about seeing the initial ruling that parents would have the autonomy to make decisions about their children based on their children's healthcare. And that's what it is. It's healthcare. And I want to shout out Helen for providing us some studies to look over, because those were extremely helpful. And I don't want to take your thunder away, but I will say this, that kids that receive this treatment actually have like lower mental health problems, right? And so they're not in need they're not as in need of mental health treatment, other drugs, things like that. And so this is actually a good thing. Luckily, this ban that we're talking about is only temporary. And I think it's rescheduled for like April for, April for like a permanent ruling. And we could still see this hold up. Raphael, what do you have to say about that thus far? You're on mute, bud.
You're on mute, Raphael.
I'm going to do
I
it
love
every
that
time.
he likes to be polite and then we can't hear him.
Keeping us on our toes.
That's a professional here.
Yeah.
I want to just bounce back to the idea of like, in this country of who gets to decide what they do with their body, because we're in a state right now, in this country where that's a question for a lot of people. What can you do? And I bring that up because one of the objections these lawyers had to this, to try to get this law passed and banning this healthcare, was that, you know, these treatments were experimental. It's like, well, A, they're not experimental. All this has been done for years and decades, and these drugs have been used in all types of different applications. And B, shouldn't the, you know, supposed small government freedoms party be okay with what someone wants to experiment with their body? They're all up about, you know, taking ivermectin. They wanted to take all kinds of, you know, drinking
Right.
bleach or whatever for COVID.
Such a good point.
But, you know, they would, you know, some of these people refuse the COVID vaccine because it's quote unquote experimental. And that's, I see the same kind of parallels here is like, you know, that is one of their arguments. It is a bad argument. These drugs are effective and safe. Like any drug, you're going to have side effects in some cases. And it's just, you know, it feels like every day someone's rights are being stripped away by the people who claim they want everyone to have the most freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a level of hypocrisy that makes my mind boil. I'm going to pass this back over so we can get into these studies of Helen.
And I do want to point out that we're not talking. My friend pointed this out to me a few months ago, and I thought this was really important. That what about like kids where they have, you know, teenagers getting nose jobs or breast implants, or you have kids participating in child pictures with teeth whitening and you know, fake tanner. These are technically gender affirming care because we're going to make you look more feminine, more like, you know, I think it's disgusting to sexualize children, obviously, but they're not up in arms about that.
No,
they're not up in arms about like, oh, you know,
Great
we're
point.
making little people look like adults, and then they accuse like, you know, queer people of being groomers, and it's like, wait, whoa, it's like I'm not having like my 9-year-old dress up like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. Do we remember that happened? So, you know, I don't like the hypocrisy very much. So the couple of articles I did put, one is from the National Library of Medicine, and the other one I put up was from the JAMA Network, but it was a study that was done by several scientists and institutions that all the institutions that were involved are listed in the study. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because they did studies on transgender kids 9 to 10 years, like right around, you know, 9 to 12 when they're going through puberty, and also with younger children as young as 5 that are questioning their gender. And the more gender affirming care that they received, whether it was acceptance by their parents or it moved into psychiatric care, medical care, they tended to do better because they were getting an affirmation that, you know, they're okay being who they are.
Right.
Now, and we hear this argument from, you know, the bigots that, you know, oh, the reason why, you know, trans kids are depressed and want to commit suicide because they're trans. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
That's not the reason. The reason why suicidality and depression, anxiety, and also substance abuse goes up with these kids is because they're not being accepted. They have to suppress who they are. They're told that they're toxic. They're told that they're bad. They're told, you know, that somehow, you know, their parents groom them, you know, the gay agenda, the queer agenda is going to take them over, you know, and that's what causes those feelings to come up. And I'm sure all of us at one time or another felt othered. We felt like we couldn't express who we are, and it makes you feel bad, you know, whether it was for a month or for, you know, 5 years, whatever it is. And then the more you are allowed to express your authentic self, though, you know, I'm not saying that mental illness is magically cured, but it gets easier. And what these kids need is acceptance and access to the care that they need. And what is very frustrating to me as well, that we actually have real problems with kids. There are real kids being harmed. We talked about a previous, you know, segment about the Catholic Church, you know, doing very bad things to kids, and nobody's really screaming about that, but the right is screaming about, like, queer kids not getting access to the medicine they need and trying to prevent that. And I find the hypocrisy very, very disgusting. And it's very frustrating to me because I know that, as a parent, I don't want the government coming in when I was raising my kids and tell me you need to do this, you need to do that. And when we're talking about this Christian nationalist, it's stepping over those lines, pushing into families that why do I have to do what makes you comfortable? Like, my kid is my priority. And I'm ranting now because I'm getting mad. So I'm gonna listen.
But you're on fire.
I know.
Yeah, you're doing great.
Yeah, I know. I'm ranting about it because it's disgusting. Because like we need. If you really care about kids, then you take care of their needs. You take care of their health. You take care of their identity, so they can grow up to be loving, compassionate, productive people. Because that's our job as parents. We're like, okay, I did my job, now fly free, little bird. Be a good person, be productive in society. That's the goal. But if you're constantly telling a kid, like, I couldn't even imagine being a trans kid living in one of these households.
Oh God, I know.
It must be terrifying. You have your parents saying that, you're in the closet and you hear this rhetoric that you're disgusting, you're wrong, you're broken.
You're evil, you're demonically possessed.
Yeah, you have a demon in you. Because remember, everybody, your genitals tell you who you are and your personality. Just remember, sorry. It's just, I find a lot of this, it makes me sad because I just think about those kids. I'm always thinking about, like, holy shit. I'm like, what about these kids? Because I have stuff going on in my own state. That's another thing we can talk about. Everybody that's watched this show knows what's going on in Florida.
Yeah.
So I have I got shit going on. So I'm going to stop ranting and hand it back to you, my friend. And speak to him. Talk to people.
I mean, I want to echo what you said about, the broader message that this sends to the kids in that state, and how it makes them feel unaccepted. It reminds me a lot of when people were talking about gay marriage and how does gay marriage being illegal hurt kids? Well, it hurts kids because it sends the message that there's something wrong with you and that you're not accepted and that you're not right and that you are incongruent with rationality in society and all these things. And it's just a terrible message to send. And the way they can frame this is so disgusting too, which is that, they frame it as perverts preying on kids, feeding kids ideas that they might be trans. And they'll point statistics, say, look at the rise in trans kids. This is all because of liberal parents who are being woke and pressing these ideas into their kids and pushing that into them. When that's not the case at all. I mean, it's the case that kids feel safe to come out in these environments and they feel now that there's a world in which they are a little bit marginally safer to come out and say, I feel like maybe my genitals don't align with who I am inside, and I feel like maybe there's something that I need help with, and I need help. And it's just disgusting how they frame it as if we're the problem, as if we're the ones who are again just forcing this on kids, and they frame it as if they would absolutely frame it, because I've heard them frame it this way. We're the party who stands behind the kids. We want to protect kids, and that's not the case at all. And it's just disgusting how they can just completely flip it like that, and gets into the minds of the people in their party, and that's the way they think. They think they are legitimately the ones protecting kids, and they're the ones on the right side. And it's awful. Jimmy, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I sure do. And I think the fact that you highlighted that these kids do need the help is going to be key in what happens in the future. So the governor of Florida, Governor Florida. Wow, close enough. But the governor of Alabama, claims that Alabama is kind of an opioid-free state, right? She was responsible for legislation, and the government of Alabama as a whole responsible going back as far as 2013 to start banning opioid related drugs, which of course are can be used to treat pain. We saw a decline in the number of prescriptions. And I just have some statistics from the Alabama government's website. So opioid prescriptions in 2013. So we had 143 per 100 people. By 2020, we had 80 prescriptions per 100. Now, that was in an effort to get people off of opioids because it was asserted that they were abusing them. And in some cases, they probably were. But what we also saw was the number of drug overdose deaths that were opioid related in 2015 was 275. In 2021, it was 981. Okay. That's more than triple. And then the overall deaths related to drugs, opioid or not, climbed from 736 in 2015 and more than doubled, not quite doubled, to 1,408. So how is that for being a drug-free state? You took away medical benefits and they tried to self-medicate because they were dealing with something, and then they ended up harming themselves. And what do we expect to happen when the youth get their medical benefits taken away and their anxiety and depression and their mental health collapses and they start to self-medicate? And so that was something that really caught my attention, you know. And I want to circle back to one point, if I may. So I stated earlier that the initial ruling took away rights for, or enforced the rights of minors, or the opportunities for minors to have surgery, et cetera, took it away for the age of 19. What it also did was force school counselors to notify parents if a child came to them and said that they might be transgender. That is a horrible, horrible violation of freedom. And it is a violation of a constitutional right to privacy, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but how often do we see this happen and things like it happen? It always points to, you know, what, it always points to like what you're guaranteed by the law. And I just think that their legality, their rights are being violated.
It's a small government party.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It's a small government party putting their 1984 shit in place.
Yeah. And it also targets doctors. So any doctors that violate this ruling can face 10 years of imprisonment. Not far off from what we see in Florida, where teachers who, teach things that are banned or call children by a name other than what they were given at birth can face being fired. We're attacking the people that are supposed to be caring for our children and really harming our children in the long run. So another rant from me. I had to pick it up from Helen and just roll with it because I'm a former Floridian and I can feel her pain down there in Florida.
It's deep.
And I'm glad you're safe from this.
Deep.
It is deep. It is deep, but I want to get deep into what Raphael has to say so he can take us home and wrap this up.
So I'm going to just be brief here and just touch on the point about doctors, potentially going to prison for up to 10 years for giving healthcare. One of the consequences that's going to start happening is all these states are going to have less doctors and they're going to be shittier doctors because they're not following data, So I am definitely, worried about all these states that are going to have a mass exodus of doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners. It happened here in Austin at a children's hospital when our amazing governor threw some laws against the trans community here. So it's going to keep happening. More and more doctors are going to leave, and most places already have shortages. A lot of places can't afford to lose their doctors, but that's what's going to happen. I'm going to kick this ball back to Helen.
So, one thing though I am hopeful for is that back in the 70s and the 80s when the gay movement started, there was awful people that were trying to take the rights away, trying to push against, you can love who you want to love. And I'm hopeful because those groups did exist at that time, that we are the generations that are now, especially the kids are not putting up with this shit anymore. They're done with it. They do not want to follow in the footsteps of the people of the past, which is fantastic. And the more that more people like, the show and other people that talk out against this is like, we are not going to allow you to do this. You can try, but we're not going to allow it. And if you want to be more educated on these topics, or, you want to see us be heated and passionate about things, please consider clicking above you and getting some more information.